Taking a look at pass rush rates. How often were teams getting home in 2022? What can we learn about these teams? What are the anomalies, the standout players and defensive lines in the league? And what can we learn about the pass rushes around the league in 2023 from last year's numbers as well? Coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL on Twitter. Feel free to get those early mailbag questions in this week. And make sure you're subscribed up on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts, and hit that notification bell so you can join us live on YouTube for that mailbag episode. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. Okay, Matt, we're doing pass rush win rates today. We're looking at NFL pass rushers. We're not pass rushers specifically, and I'm going to pull it up on the screen for those of you that are watching us on YouTube. And Williamson's got a little spreadsheet going here. It is spreadsheet season, by the way, for Matt Williamson.
Oh, yeah.
More appearances of certain spreadsheets around the league. But we're talking about pressure percentage for defenses around the league. We'll talk sacks. We'll talk quarterback knockdown percentage, hurry percentage, and how often those teams are blitzing as well, all under the umbrella of quarterback pressures for these teams. And I think there's a ton we can learn about the teams that were good and the teams that were bad at getting to the quarterback last year.
Absolutely. So I've done this, I think, 4 or 5 off seasons in a row about this time of year when things start to quiet down, try to do a little bit of my version of analytics, which is elementary school version of analytics. But I go to Pro Football Reference, which if there's anything you want to know about the league, you can pretty much find it there. It's a wonderful resource. I basically cut and paste all these numbers, but then I start to analyze it. I sort them all by each category. There's 32 teams in the league. Again, not an exact science. If you're green, that means you're in the top 8. That means you're in the top quarter. If you're red, for those of you that are watching, that means you're in the bottom 8. And blitz percentage is one of those things that isn't good or bad. It's just how you choose to play football. But red is lowest, green is most. But the other ones are how successful you are. And what I like to do is there's weird things that pop up. Like, why is this team all green, but they're red in one category? Or, wow, they blitz a ton and they never get home. So that's originally how I started to look at it, was blitz percentage versus pressures. Like if you blitz a lot, you should get a lot of pressures. Well, what if you don't? Well, that's a major problem. Or vice versa, a team that barely blitzes but generates a ton of pressures. I think your Niners were number 1 in that last year.
I think there's a lot of teams that come under both of those umbrellas. New York Jets is another one that I'm looking at on the screen that had a really nice pressure percentage and a low blitz percentage.
Yes.
But I think we got to start this off with, and by the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, and again, make sure you're subscribed up there to the new Peacock and Williamson YouTube channel. It is filtered by pressure percentage. So that's how it's sorted right now if you're watching this on YouTube. And the number 1 team in the NFL last year with pressure percentage wasn't the 70-sack Philadelphia Eagles defense. It was actually the Dallas Cowboys, who had about 16 fewer sacks on the season.
Yeah, and real quick, I want to talk about the Cowboys for sure because, wow, they're impressive. And it doesn't shock me that they're number 1, although the Eagles come in at 2 and had 70 sacks, which is an ungodly number. Usually something in the 50s leads the league. Dallas was at 54. But a couple notes is, you mentioned this off the air, so I just want to make sure we talk about it just a touch, is pressure percentage is stickier than sacks. Probably people are looking at this or listening to us going, I don't really care how many sacks my team gets. Well, that's fine. But the Football Outsiders, the Pro Football Focuses that have done this year after year after year would say, I would rather have my team be at the top of the league in pressure percentage than sacks, because there's a better chance that will translate year to year. So if you're one of these teams that's green across the board, but red in sacks, that's a good news. Like, chances are you're probably in line to really boost your sack percentage. And then the other thing we were talking about, and this applies to Dallas, certainly the Eagles, probably more than any team in the league, the Chiefs, it's also a chicken or egg situation in that if you have a lot of leads and you're winning by 14 in the fourth quarter, that sure helps to get, your sack numbers up. The Eagles had 70. They were winning like every second half last year. But you don't get to be winning by being a bad pass rush team either. You know what I mean? So the one thing I said to you before we hit record is if I could have anything on my roster, of course I want a franchise quarterback. But the second best thing I want is a dominant pass rush.
It's all about the quarterback. Yeah. And you just follow the quarterback down the list of valuable assets in the NFL. It starts with quarterback. Then it's the guy that goes and gets the quarterback. So then it's the guy who protects the quarterbacks, right? Then it's the guys that catch the passes from the quarterbacks. Then it's the guys that cover the guys who catch the passes from the quarterbacks and get their defensive lineman there a little closer, right? So that's just, if you want to know what are the most valuable positions in the NFL, follow that list. And the more, either if they're a quarterback or the more impact they have on the quarterback position, that's how valuable they are.
Yep. So back to the Cowboys. They're number one in terms of pressure percentage. They're not a super high blitz team or a super low blitz team, but I think the best single pass rusher in the entire league is Micah Parsons. And your boy Nick Bosa, my boy TJ Watt, Myles Garrett.
Outright disrespect from Matt Williamson of TJ Watt and Nick Bosa.
The last two reigning defensive players of the year. There's that Donald guy with the Rams. He's been pretty good lately. Chris Jones. It's an unbelievable group of pass rushers in the league right now, and I can't stress that enough. Best group I've ever seen, and the disparity between D-line and O-line is great, but I think Parsons is number one.
And I think we might see a defensive player of the year in his future. And he's officially, quote unquote, an edge player, a defensive lineman now, and not a slash linebacker. We'll see if it actually changes how he's utilized. But he's going to get up in weight a little bit. I hope he doesn't get too much up in weight because he's already a monster off the edge. I don't think he needs a lot more pounds to be a dominant edge rusher, which Matt Williams thinks he's already the best in the league. So there you go. And that's a lot of the reason why the Cowboys had a really good pressure rate and a really good, front getting after quarterbacks and hurry percentage last year.
Yeah, it's a pretty good group.
Philadelphia Eagles, an absurd 70 sacks in 2022, Matt, and number 2 in the league in pressure percentage, by the way. So the Cowboys number 1 at 25.6% getting home on dropbacks, and the Eagles were just slightly below that, 25.5 getting home to the quarterback there. And if you're getting to the quarterback on a quarter of the dropbacks, you're doing a great job.
They're doing a great job. And I don't know how much more we've talked about the Eagles. I mean, everyone knows what's going on there. They seem like they're way ahead of the curve in team building. They love linemen. Hargrave goes to your Niners, so we'll just draft Jalen Carter and sprinkle in a little bit of Nolan Smith too, to just keep the strength. 2 first-round pass rushers. They have all shapes and sizes. They trade for Robert Quinn in the middle of the year just for the heck of it. Throw a little Namakong Suh in there for fun too in mid-year. So, I mean, they come after you in hockey waves, which is enviable. And they're the team in the league that reminds me most of like a Georgia or a Bama that has guys on the bench at any time that would, play for every team in the league.
Reminded even a little more of Georgia now after the last
right.
Georgia defenders that they brought in who had the best defensive line in college football. So that makes sense. And nobody's put more resources into the defensive line than the Philadelphia Eagles have, and that's why they're good at doing it. But I will say, Matt, they don't have the one star pass rusher that maybe the Cowboys, the 49ers, the Steelers have coming off the edge. But so a lot of really good players. And you look at the 70 sacks, and I think it's one of those teams where you look and you say, okay, there's got to be some regression there. And I think there's some teams with some positive regression. They were among the tops in the NFL in pressure percentage, so it's not a surprise that they led the league in sacks necessarily, but they were way out in front in sacks. And like you mentioned earlier, a lot of it is because of game script, and you get to, when you have a lead, you can go after opposing quarterbacks a little bit more. But if you look at, okay, let's say Jalen Carter's not quite ready for prime time as a rookie. You lose who was probably your best defensive lineman last year in Javon Hargave. That number could dip a lot. And could that affect how their defense plays overall, even though it's very similar unit this year?
And Eagles fans hate when I bring this up, but their path to the Super Bowl, which isn't their fault, was as easy as it gets. I mean, they had the easiest schedule in the league. the way that the playoffs fell, it just worked out extremely well. It's just not going to be that easy anymore. And what I mean by that is you're not going to be winning by 20 in the fourth quarter as often. You know what I mean? And so it's a dominant pass rush. I probably would rank it number one, in terms of all they have, but they're not going to hit 70 sacks again. I mean, that's crazy talk.
Yeah. And very unlikely that they're going to, the opposing team is going to lose their quarterback in the first quarter of NFC Championship.
That kind of stuff, right? Exactly. Play the Giants and that kind of thing.
I'm sure we'll hear from Philadelphia.
Oh, they hate when I say that.
Yeah, let Matt know. At Williamson NFL, Philadelphia Eagles are overrated, according to Matt Williams. How about those Jets? The lowest blitz percentage in the league, but the third highest pressure percentage in the NFL.
This is the most impressive team to me, and I would have never guessed that before I did the exercise. So they're in the green in quarterback knockdowns, in sacks, pressure percentage. As you mentioned, they're third in pressure percentage, but they're down at the bottom in blitz rate. Like, that's how you do it. That is again, we always try to talk about the Niners, but that's what the Niners ideally like to do. That's what Salah is doing. And that Quinn Williams guy needs to get mentioned too amongst the elites. And, they have guys like Huff and, and now they added McDonald. So maybe it's even going to get better.
Absolutely. And Quinn Williams, by the way, is going to get paid quite a bit of money, as is Nick Bosa this offseason as well. Yep. Both up for some big bumps in pay. So really interesting team there with the New York Jets. Now have a future Hall of Fame quarterback there. So that's why you're excited for a Jets season this year, right? If you get that bump at quarterback, because they have the rest in place.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the pass rush should maintain itself, which is maybe the best pass rush in the league, or one of.
More of the top pass rushes in the NFL, more of the bottom, and which teams could we see flip the script in 2023 with their pass rush arsenal next? Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Make a fast break right now to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500 back. They have upped their no-sweat first bet to $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sports book. And NBA finals time, right? You got Nuggets and Heat, which looks like it's going to be a pretty good series now heading into game 3 with the Heat at home. Looks like they are home dogs to the Denver Nuggets. Nuggets favored by 2.5 there. There's tons of NBA finals props as well. There's tons of NHL playoffs to bet on. There's Major League Baseball every day, all summer long, with the exception of 2 days before and after the All-Star break. You can bet on the All-Star game as well. You can bet on week 1 of the NFL season with my San Francisco 49ers favored by a field goal on the road at Williamson's Pittsburgh Steelers. So
walking into a hornet's nest.
Yeah. We'll talk about the rates for both of those defense, which might play a pretty big role in that contest in week 1. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get your no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Matt. So taking a look at some of the other top teams in pressure percentage in 2022. The Jacksonville Jaguars, speaking of regression, this is a team that I think could be sort of the opposite of where the Dallas Cowboys were, the opposite of where the Philadelphia Eagles were, where you look at all their pressure percentages, the knockdown percentage, and hurry percentages were in the green, among the top of the league, 4th highest pressure percentage, but they were bottom 8 in sacks last year.
Yeah, and I want to skip ahead a little and lump the Jags and the Packers together, because they both are almost the exact same profile. Really high in pressure percentage, really high in every other metric, but bottom 8 in sacks. So as we opened the show, that's encouraging. The Packers didn't have Rashawn Gary for much of the year. A guy like Travon Walker is a developing player. You would think just personnel-wise, it'll be better for both teams. But even so, they wreaked a lot of havoc. They just didn't end up with a lot of sacks. I'll bet the over on both those teams from their sack numbers from last year. No doubt.
Yes. A couple of notes on each of those teams. First, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Trayvon Walker, the #1 overall pick in the 2022 draft, just saw a report today, in fact, that he's going to be working in that defensive line room a little bit more than being that outside stand-up rusher. I don't think he's the Aldon Smith that general manager Trent Baalke thought he was drafting. He's got some traits like that, but I mean, he's a defensive lineman. You want his hand in, he's super athletic, but you don't want to drop him back into coverage. You want to go in and get in the quarterback. So if he's more of a 5 tech on early downs, that's fine. Then he can rush from the outside, rush from the inside. I think that's where he's going to get his best production anyway. So, and he can set the edge early on downs anyway, but he should be rushing from probably the interior just as much as he's rushing from the outside as well. So an interesting player, and you can put him as a stand-up rusher on early downs, no problem, but I want to see him rushing closer to from the inside on third downs.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like the Micah Parsons conversation. Like, sure, he's a great off-the-ball linebacker, but he's an elite edge rusher. Just do that, and hopefully Walker is similar. I'm just a D lineman. Let me do that.
And do the most valuable thing.
Right.
And looking at the Packers, talking about some positive regression here for the Packers with just the sack numbers. Their defense was kind of a letdown last year.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at their pressure rate was good, but the way they got it is they still had to blitz a lot. They were among the top teams in the league in blitz percentage. And so I think they would love to not only get that sack rate up, but not have to blitz as much to get there.
100%. And maybe Gary coming back helps. Wyatt you would hope takes a step forward in his second season. Their first round pick was Van Ness. I mean, as usual, they have high picks all over that defense. Now it's time to put it together, but they were disruptive. So I think that's encouraging for both those teams, the Jags and the Packers.
How about this one that just stands out like a beacon is the New York Giants, Matt, who were top 6 in the NFL in pressure percentage. They got home 24.3% of the time last year. Middle of the road sack numbers, 41 team sacks, but a league high by a lot blitz percentage. They blitzed almost 40% of the time.
That's like 5% more than number 2, so that's a perfect example. It's like, I mean, Thibodeau's a good player. I like Leonard Williams, but I love Lawrence. Like Ojulari's a good player. But that's just how they're structured. I mean, that's a Wink Martindale thing. When he was with the Ravens, they were at the top of the league in blitz as well. They play a ton of defensive backs on the field, a lot of dime, even 7 defensive backs. Drafted a man-to-man corner, Banks, in the first round. It's basically no surprise what the Martindale defense does. But you better be high in pressure percentage. I mean, if you're going to blitz, you better have some results.
Absolutely. Taking a look at the rest of the teams here in the top 8 in pressure percentage, the top quarter of the league in pressure percentage that we haven't mentioned yet. Number 5 was the Kansas City Chiefs.
No shocker.
55 sacks on the year. Yeah, just under 25% pressure percentage. By the way, looking at the discrepancy in the top and the bottom teams in blitz percentage, the Giants we mentioned just under 40% blitz percentage. That's a hard thing to put together, those two words. The New York Jets, the lowest in the league, were under 50. So 25% more often the Giants blitzed than the New York Jets, who were 14.9%.
And I don't have this capability, but I'm curious too. This is a total side note, but I would love to know, what's the average number of pass rushers you bring on a drop back? Because there's a difference between a 5-man blitz, a 6-man blitz, a 7-man pressure, so this is defined as 5 or more pass rushers. But I know for the fact the Giants bring 6 a lot as well, but they're not getting extra credit for that.
Yeah. Or the Patriots, speaking of the Patriots, who were number 7 on the list in pressure percentage last year, 24.1%. They'll bring 0 at times. Bill Belichick will. So that'd be interesting. Like, there's sometimes we're like, okay, we're just going to drop everybody back. And we're not going to try to contain you and try to put a bunch of people in coverage and confuse you there. We might bring not only 1 extra, we might bring 2 extra. We might drop somebody from this side, but bring somebody over here. So you're still rushing 4, but you're blitzing at the same time. So a lot of different ways to get home.
So Belichick, I'm glad you brought that up because that's really interesting to me. Belichick is notorious for only rushing 3, and has had great success over the year. We know he's a chameleon week to week and changing things, but I wonder if that number's out there. If it isn't, somebody smart should create it and call it the Williamson Blitz number or something. Like, I bet the Patriots average pass rushers is like 4.2, where the Giants might be like 5.9. You know what I mean? Like, how many pass rushers per drop back on average do you send at them, as opposed to blitz percentage? We'll take it up another level here, this conversation.
So the Giants were way ahead in blitz percentages. But for some other teams that really had high blitz percentages and they ended up getting home, maybe middle of the league, maybe top half of the league, but not, top quarter of the league. Teams like we mentioned the Packers, who there should be some positive regression there in their stats. The Detroit Lions and the Arizona Cardinals jump out to me here with 31 and 34% blitz percentages with the Lions and the Cardinals respectively. And they ended up getting home enough, I would say, but
they kind of had to manufacture it, though. I mean,
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, there's clearly they need to get better without bringing pressure, and that's the obvious elephant in the room probably for those defenses who didn't play great last year.
Like especially Arizona, I look at them and think if they're going to blitz a high percentage of the time, I bet it doesn't go well in terms of the back end holding up.
Second highest blitz percentage in the league, by the way, were the Cardinals.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it looks like it. Yeah, they're 5% less than they're 34.5. The Giants were just under 40%.
Okay. But yeah, I think that was kind of by necessity.
You mentioned the 49ers earlier. They were, 11th, I think, in pressure percentage in the league. And when you look at their sack numbers, they were good, not great last year. They had the defensive player of the year in Nick Bosa, getting, I think it was 18 and a half sacks, but he didn't get a lot of help sack-wise on that 49ers defensive line. So,
bit of a misnomer.
I know there's a lot of QB wins talk with Jimmy Garoppolo and his history with the 49ers, but guess what? All those seasons the 49ers were good. They had a healthy Nick Bosa too. I think those 49ers wins stat might go to Nick Bosa just as much as they should go to Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, and it adds up now. I think a lot of us, myself included, thought, wow, what an embarrassment of riches to go get Hargrave. Well, maybe that front isn't as productive non-Bosa division than people thought,
Exactly. And they're expecting a lot from last year's second round pick in Drake Jackson. And clearly they're, Javon Kinlaw's been a disappointment. So they brought in a guy to give him that first round, caliber play in Javon Hargrave because they weren't getting it from Javon Kinlaw.
Yeah. Big old butt on Javon Hargrave. If you haven't
noticed. Yeah. He's caked up. He's caked up player in the league, according to Matt Williamson. Did the Steelers screw up not using Javon Hargrave enough as a pass rusher and just kind of strictly using him as that nose tackle?
Yes. And I always said of all the free agents that left in the last 10 years, that's the one that hurt me the most, even before he became a star, because he's such a Steeler. Develop him from a small school, give him a little more year after year after year. And their cap situation when Ben was making a fortune just didn't allow it. I bet deep down if I had a drink with Kevin Colbert and said, who's the one that you really would have kept? I bet it would have been Javon.
Speaking of those Pittsburgh Steelers, Matt, we'll get to them next.
They're really interesting. Yeah.
Bottom of the league in pressure percentage next. Thanks, everybody, once again, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Shout out to the everydayers. We got a fun episode coming up tomorrow, celebrating my co-host's 50th birthday. And talking about his journey, how he ended up where he's at. We got a lot of questions and a lot of feedback from our mailbag last week, talking a little bit about, how to get into scouting. How did Williamson get to where he is? Why are we doing a podcast together talking about the NFL when, podcasting didn't exist when Matt Williamson started this journey? So I think that'll be a fun episode tomorrow. Of course, a mailbag, and we're going to start doing our all division teams as well, which will be a really fun project this summer here on Peacock and Williamson. Make sure you're subscribed up on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. All right, bringing up the spreadsheet here on YouTube for those of you visual learners. And
the bottom stuff is interesting as the top, if not more.
I learned a lot from looking at the bottom of this spreadsheet, Matt. So I always like when Matt sends me a new spreadsheet, and this one was really fun to look at. But we already started talking about the Steelers, so let's get there. They had to bring a lot of extra pressure, and it didn't really help, Matt. They were third worst in the NFL in pressure percentage, 17.4 sacks. They did end up with middle-of-the-road sack numbers. They got 40 sacks, but not a lot of knockdowns, not a lot of hurries, not a lot of pressure, but had to blitz a lot still to be bad at getting to the quarterback.
So people around here, and I get it, just assume it's your birthright to be at the top of the league in sacks and beating up on quarterbacks, Blitzburg, going back to Joe Green, the Steel Curtain. And I don't know if everyone realizes this, but it's remarkable. Before this season, the Steelers led the league in sacks 5 years in a row. I mean, that's bonkers. I mean, that's really, really insane. And this past year, it wasn't good. I mean, these numbers are as unflattering to the Steelers as just about any team in the league. And I think there's a misnomer that they got Hayward, Highsmith came on, Watt, they're a great pass rushing team. Well, they're near the top of the league in blitz percentage, but they're at the bottom of the league in every other category but sacks, which was kind of middle of the road. I mean, only two teams, the Bears and Falcons, created less pressure last year than the Steelers. So I wrote an extensive article about this and how it could be different next year. And, for DK Pittsburgh Sports, which is a local, really good site that I write an article a week for. And the short answer is their pressure percentage when TJ Watt was on the field was still really good. And it was really bad when he was off the field.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Was this just TJ Watt was half the season?
Then that's huge. I mean, I get that. But I think it's more to it than just that as well. I mean, because when TJ came back, he was sort of a shell of himself too. I mean, and teams didn't even double him for a while there as he was recuperating. So he's that type of impact player. And I'm sure Bosa, Garrett, Parsons would all be the same. If you're that elite, that your numbers are drastically different with and without you on the field. And every Steelers defensive metric since Watt came to the league, I mean, even their ability against the run, turnovers, everything you can imagine, yards per play, is unbelievably night and day when he's on the field versus not. So it probably will get better. But the crux of my article was all of you Steeler fans just assume it's a good pass rush. It really wasn't last year.
And this is what goes back to my positional value thing. When I look at the Falcons and I look at the Lions and I'm like, dude, I don't care. Draft another lineman. Another lineman. There's not enough. There's never enough. You need a Robin to your Batman. Maybe you find a Batman with another Batman. Get a tackle and a end and another tackle and a situational guy and block the other teams that have all these freak of nature pass rushers too. And then sprinkle some, the running back is the cracked pepper on top of the salad at the very end. You know what I mean? But and the Falcons are the last in the league at pressure percentage, right?
And they have it for like 3 years in a row. I mean, it's been year after year bad.
And that's why I crush a team like the Falcons who draft a running back at number 8 when you can't get opposing team's quarterback. And if you can't get to them, you will never be good.
Yeah. And in free agency, they added Calais Campbell and Onyemata. And maybe they're hoping the Penn State kid that was a second-round pick last year takes a step up. But that's a far cry from Myles Garrett and the top guys. Right. You know what I mean?
The 49ers have Nick Bosa. He was defensive player of the year. And we still need more. Let's go get J.
Right.
And the Steelers, who is the Batman or who's the Robin to TJ Watt's Batman?
Alex Highsmith had 15 sacks or so. He's really come on. And Cam Hayward. I mean, but for the Steelers, it was those three. And then no one else had more than two. Besides Watt. Watt had like 4 or 5. But I mean, they need the secondary guys to do more, where the Bears is another one right now. But the Bears are a different story. They at least attack their offense for field's sake. If they don't go crazy on the D-line this offseason coming up, I'll be very critical. But Atlanta ignores it every year, basically. And they're always at the bottom in this metric every time I do it.
Right. And even if you argue, okay, well, Bijan's not just a running back because he's a really good pass catcher as well. Well, you just spent back-to-back top 10 picks on pass catchers before that too.
Yeah. And you're not knocking Bijan Robinson. You're just saying, give me a pass rusher. Right.
I love running backs. They're fun to watch. I wish they stayed healthier and were more valuable. They're just not. And you just had 1,000-yard rookie running back, by the way, that you got in the 5th round the year before too. So that's why I crush teams that like the Falcons who drafted a running back high. And unlike the Steelers, though, the Falcons didn't even try to generate pressure. They're like, we suck at getting the quarterback. I guess we'll just not be good.
Right. We just won't blitz. We'll just play soft, drop 8, drop 7, don't allow the big play, and quarterback just sits there patting the ball. And, so that needs to change, in my opinion, no doubt.
Absolutely. And my team that I really love to take that step up, you mentioned the Chicago Bears. This is the reason why they won't, if they don't get their defensive line figured out and can't pressure opposing quarterbacks. And I get why they, of all teams, would maybe build a little differently and say, no, we got to go all in for our quarterback and draft a first-round offensive tackle and make a big trade to go get him a number 1 wide receiver. I'm all the way on board, and I loved the Chicago Bears offseason. But one thing that's been missing in both of the last 2 offseason builds for Ryan Poles since he showed up on the scene is getting impact players on the defensive line and going and getting the quarterback.
Absolutely. And Rome wasn't built in a day. I mean, I'll give them a year's leeway that they better address it next year. And they were the team that traded Robert Quinn. Not that he's a superstar, halfway through the season. So they were dumping even their best guys in this capacity, Roquan, so I get it, but you better not be 31st next year.
Right. Yeah.
Well, they probably will be next year. I mean, next offseason, they better address it.
Yes. Right. And they'll have a lot of resources again, whether it's free agent dollars or more likely, one of those extra first round picks to go get themselves some defensive linemen.
So there's two teams I want to bring up real quick. We talked Packers and Jags as regression's coming, folks, and it should be good in the sack world. Well, the Saints and the Ravens might be the opposite. That they both had 48 sacks, which was top 8, but their pressure percentage low, so they could easily regress the opposite way. And trust me, I pay a lot of attention to the Ravens or AFC North. Go pull up their defensive line on our lads. It's not very good. I mean, they're begging for like Ajabo and Owe to be their stars, and they're unbelievably unproven. The Ravens' D front is not what it used to be.
Ojabo's big, kind of red shirt player last
year,
and he's super talented. And if he has sort of a breakout, which is now going to be basically his rookie campaign for the Ravens, I mean, that would be huge for them. And it's obviously, especially when you color code them with the top 8 and the bottom 8 of the league, you see a team like the Saints who's 4th worst pressure percentage, and how they get 48 sacks. How do they get home that often for how little they got near a quarterback?
Yeah, and that place is so loud. I'm sure that helps too. I mean, different conditions certainly help, but the Ravens and Saints might be somewhat of paper champions in terms of sacks because the nuts and bolts of it don't hold up that well. One other bottom team I wanted to reference too is the Browns. I mean, the Browns are basically red across the board. I bet that dramatically changes this year. I mean, with the D end thing, the guys, the compliments to Myles Garrett they added, they should at least be middle of the pack next year.
You would think that even without the best compliments to Myles Garrett, they've always been looking for that player to go with him. And whether it's Clowney and it's been a host of guys and some draft picks, and they've never found it.
Yeah, and hopefully they took more stabs at it this year. They drafted one, they signed 2, Zadarius Smith. So I think they probably had it figured out. And spoiler alert, I might pick Myles Garrett to be Defensive Player of the Year this year.
Yeah, he's due, and Micah Parsons. So those would be some good money spent. By the way, I love 4th round pick. I think he was drafted early in the 4th round by the Browns, Isaiah McGuire. He was one of my favorites in that mid-round area. I thought he was a 2nd or 3rd round guy at the latest. He slipped to them in the 4th round. That's a nice pick. And then they brought in Zadarius as well after the draft. So they're trying to get there. They're trying to get home, and that'll be a huge factor for the Browns and all these teams that show up in the red.
I give them credit. I expect the Browns to take a leap.
Let us know what you think at BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL on Twitter. You can get those early mailbag questions in, or you could drop a comment on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed up on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. Matt and I back tomorrow right here, Peacock and Williamson.